Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's briefing. Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and give it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah and I'm our Director of Data Analytics and Risk here at Novacoast. I'm based in our Wichita, Kansas headquarters where it is freezing cold and I hate it. It's 30 degrees. So any of you that are in warmer weather, please enjoy that on my behalf. And today I'm going to talk about third-party risk management and kind of just some of the trends that we're seeing. So, as a consultant, I personally feel, and as a consultant running, data analytics and risk, which means anything data, dashboarding, third-party risk management, GRC, cyber risk quantification for Novacoast, human risk management. I feel that third-party risk management conversations I have had way more in the last year than really any other time. I think it's a topic that I'm probably seeing the most conversations, escalate the most quickly. The main things a lot of people are wanting to talk about is organizations, wanting to automate it, trying to get rid of away from those manual processes, and try to move past just something that's very compliance based. So I thought it would be a good topic to talk about today. To get into the agenda a bit here. I will start off with just a real world third party breach example. I'll keep it pretty brief because I think we all, know how those go, right? And then I'm going to talk about things that I think are important for a TPRM program in terms of if you do want to cut down the workload and do some automation. Things like vendor tiering and prioritization, AI, continuous monitoring, and talking about how those are being implemented, in some of our customers. And outsourcing versus doing it in-house, looking at the trends in the market of what I'm seeing about people wanting to do it in-house, wanting to outsource, whether they're doing it offshore, onshore. I'll just kind of talk through what I see a lot of customers doing. So to dive in, the real life breach I'm going to talk about is a Marriott breach, or as I recently found out, it is pronounced Marriott, not Marriott. I have pronounced it Marriott my entire life, so I don't know that I'm going to be able to change that anytime soon. But a Marriott breach, but not the big one from a few years ago. What was it in 2018 that I think everybody, was pretty familiar with, right? Instead, I am going to talk about one that happened in January of 2025. Um, so this had to do, obviously, a third-party breach with a hotel management software that Marriott was using, sorry, Marriott, called Hotelier, if I'm saying that right, used by not only Marriott, but also Hilton, Hyatt, and a bunch more of the big hotel chains. So they were using this to kind of, manage reservations, bookings, types of things like that. Threat actors stole 8 terabytes of data from AWS S3 buckets from Hotelier. And they did that by using an employee login to an Atlassian server, and they were able to gain that information from information stealing malware for that employee login, right? So they were able to get 8 different terabytes of data. I think it ended up being around 7.8 from these different AWS S3 buckets, not only from Marriott, but people like Hilton, Hyatt, and a lot of other customers. The data that was leaked was including hotel guest reservations. That's pretty bad, right? Employee emails, hotel guest PII, including first name, last name, emails and addresses, transaction information, as well as internal Marriott data as well. So some of their internal data was also leaked in this breach. And as part of the consequences, Marriott immediately suspended automated hotelier operations right as they found out about the breach, which obviously also not only meant that they had data leaked, but an impact to their operations, right? So why am I talking about this? Why do I care if our vendors get breached, right? I'm going to start with a quote that I love. You can outsource work, but you cannot outsource accountability. You can hire all these vendors to do all these different things for you, and you can outsource a bunch of different work. But at the end of the day, the accountability for any type of breach that they have that involves your data, your operations, or your reputation, it's still on you, and you have the accountability for that, right? Whether that's fines, legal proceedings, anything like that. So it really is something that is important to monitor and try to move past, really more of a compliance-based approach, which, like I've said, I feel that a lot of kind of customers have been doing up until this point. So for the rest of this webinar, and I'll try to keep it relatively brief, I'm going to talk about, how to manage that. In terms of going over some of the things that I think are the most successful practices for managing third parties that we've seen as consultants in our different clients, right? What are the more mature clients doing? How are they kind of handling this? How are they automating it and things like that? The first thing I think is really important to talk about is vendor prioritization or vendor tiering. Any of the more mature programs that I have seen doing TPRM are doing some type of vendor tiering, which I think is probably a pretty obvious. A lot of people are probably doing that, but I want to dig in a little bit more to what I think is an actual successful type of vendor tiering and how I think we can get a little bit more granular in that and why it's important to do. Why we need to do vendor tiering? Obviously, not all vendors are created equal. Your CRM vendors or your SAPs of the world, your accounting and your expense software, are not the same as the lawnmowers and the cleaning crew, right? And some of these other snack vendors, okay? So not all vendors are created equal. And one of the more fundamental formulas that I typically see for determining criticality of vendors and vendor tiering is a combination of impact, access, and data sensitivity. So we want to see what impact would your company have if this vendor was to go down or suspend their operations, right? A great example of an impact-based third-party breach or, kind of outage was CrowdStrike, right? We saw that one. That was a lot more just impact based, not necessarily any data sensitivity or anything like that that came into play, but huge impact in terms of outages for all of their customers. The next is access. What does this vendor actually have access to in your environment, right? Are they actually able to access any type of data? Can they access different, networks or secure operations or things like that within your environment? And then the last kind of part of that formula is data sensitivity. So how sensitive is the data that they're able to access if they are able to access anything? That's a really important thing to figure out. And those are the three key vectors that you want to understand when you're coming up with a vendor tiering or prioritization system. That's kind of the fundamental formula that I see used the most if I was to boil everything down into something, more fundamental, right? The next tip or trick that I have when doing vendor tiering or coming up with criticalities is to have really, really clear and precise tier definitions. And this is the number one area that I see not done enough when vendor tiering and prioritization is in play. Meaning that if you have a high, medium, and low, or critical high, medium, low, or maybe a 1 to 4 tiering system, it's not that those tiering systems themselves are inherently bad. But if you don't have very clear definitions for what each tier means and what it means to be in each tier, then that's when things can really start to fall apart. So the statistician inside of me always tells people that one of the biggest mistakes people make in measurement is not having a clear definition of what they are measuring. So the same time you want to have a clear, or the same way you want to have a very clear definition of any KPI or any metric that you're measuring in your environment, you want to have a very clear and precise definition of what each tier means. And I'll kind of get into that on the next slide. And then the last thing I'll go over on the high level about vendor tiering is that there are different types of tiering approaches that I see used at our customers. The first would be manual. This is going to be probably the most subjective and what I would obviously say is maybe the least desired of all the approaches. This is when you're just manually going through every vendor and kind of deciding, do I think this is a high, medium, and low, a critical, a 1 to 4, and you're manually assigning that for every single vendor that you're assessing. The second would be more of a question-based approach. So that's where you would have some type of question or scoring system to apply to each single vendor. And based on the results of those questions or maybe the outcoming score, you assign it to an appropriate tier. So for example, one of the questions that you might have is, does this vendor have access to our customer's PII? And potentially, if the answer is yes, then no matter what, they are named a critical vendor, right? So some type of question-based or scoring-based outcome, still a relatively manual process, but a little bit more of a formula or equation behind it that allows you to be, like I said, a little bit more precise in your tiering and definitions. And then the last would be a fully automated vendor tiering approach. And this is really only possible if you have a tool, like a TPRM tool that does that. There are a few TPRM tools in the market that will actually do automated vendor tiering for you based again on something that's kind of, question based or a rule set. So you'll just enter in all of your vendors and they'll help you with an automated tiering or scoring system. Like I said, this is really only achievable if you have one of the TPRM tools in the market that does do this functionality. I won't go over them in this talk because I'm not pitching any vendors, but if anyone has questions, wants to shoot it in the comments or shoot me an email after about a few of those that at least I know about, happy to provide. But there are TPRM tools in the market that will help with automated tiering. So moving on a bit to dive deeper into vendor tiering, I wanted to go over some of those questions that I do think are important to ask when you're figuring out the criticality or tiering of all of your vendors. The first is around data sensitivity. So data sensitivity, you want to be asking things like, does this vendor access, store, or process any sensitive data like customer or employee information that you guys might have, right? If they have access to some of that sensitive data or store it or process it, then they're going to want to be in a higher criticality tier. System access, asking questions like, does the vendor have access to critical systems, networks, or the cloud environment? Looking at business criticality, so questions around, would your business operations be significantly disrupted if this vendor failed? So thinking back to that Marriott breach, right? If that system went down and they had to shut down that system like they did in this breach, is it going to significantly impact your systems? Again, looking at the CrowdStrike outage, right? When that went out, we saw significant outages from a lot of the vendors, including flights like Delta that went down. Regulatory impact. So asking questions like, is this vendor subject to or do they impact your compliance obligations, right? Thinking GDR or GRDP, HIPAA, all of those, right? Are they subject to that? Do they impact them? Anything that's compliance or regulatory related, we still do need to account for, even though we're trying to move this past just more of a compliance-based exercise. And then finally, of course, reputational risk, right? Could a failure or breach by this vendor damage your brand? Always something that you do want to understand. Reputational and brand damage is something that can be very, very hard to understand or quantify. A way that I always look at it is, depending on the industry that you're in, and kind of your customer's profile and asset, maybe your stock price, which always have to consider that stocks will typically tank or dip during a breach, but that they do rebound pretty quick, right? So is that actually something that we want to consider? Or do we maybe say, it might be a short-term gain, but in the long term, it's really not going to impact us? So all of these are important questions to ask when you are coming up with that vendor tiering system. And I'm happy to send a list of those questions over as well to anyone who might want them after this. Just let me know. The next thing we want to do is actually assess based on that tiering. So not only are we assigning tiering to vendors, but we're going to have different assessment protocols based on the tiering, right? So tier ones, your criticals, you're going to implement the most rigorous due diligence. So we're talking full security assessments, probably annual reassessments, right? Potentially audits, edits, evidence collection, frequent monitoring, so doing continuous monitoring as well, and strict access protocols. Those are your tier ones. And again, typically I see all of my clients reassessing tier ones at a minimum annually. Tier two, or your high, maybe performing slightly lighter assessments, such as like a self-assessment, and monitoring them a little bit less frequently than tier ones. I see about half of my customers doing tier twos annually and about half doing like every other year biannually. So that one's kind of a little bit more dependent, but it tends to drop off a little bit. Then your tier threes and your tier fours, you're low, right? We're just focusing on basic checks, contract reviews. Are they hitting SLAs, monitoring? And really the big thing for tiers three and four is having some type of continuous monitoring tool. It's big for all of them, but especially for tier three and fours where you might not be doing annual or customized assessments. And always making sure that if you do have some type of continuous monitoring tool for TPRM, that you have alerting enabled if they fall below a specific threshold, right? So make sure that tool has the ability to send you an alert when a vendor dips for a certain reason, and always try to validate that information to the best of your ability. So moving on to, of course, another hot topic, AI and GPRM. And this, I am a big proponent of AI, but I'm also really realistic about where it is in the market in terms of, is it actually affecting our P&L? Is it actually making us more productive, right? Are we not doing AI just to do AI? So I want to go over a very, very realistic approach of what I've seen my clients successfully using AI for TPRM, and then also what AI is not good for TPRM. So what I've seen for AI for third-party risk assessments, one thing that is hugely important to me, and if you take one thing away from this, let it be this, is that if you have some type of TPRM tool, or you are looking to acquire some type of TPRM tool to help get off of spreadsheets and do your questionnaires and things like that, make sure that it has AI-based questionnaire analysis, meaning that the vendor can upload a SOC 2 report, a pen testing report, anything like that, and the AI will analyze the report that's uploaded and automatically fill out questionnaires from the AI analysis, right? And then let you know, hey, here's these 5 questions that we couldn't find anything answer for, and here's these 10 questions we're a little unsure. We want you to double check, right? But AI is really good at flagging inconsistent or incomplete answers as well. So always having AI trying to run through some of those responses and say, are there 2 responses that contradict each other? Is there something that's incomplete? Next, we want to look at natural language summaries for leadership. Obviously, a really kind of, obvious one, but AI is very, very good at summarizing text. We all know this. So have it write up those summaries, have it pull the key points from different assessments, or if you get a long PDF report recommendation that's 10 pages, right, have AI run through it and give you the top bullet points. Risk scoring models. AI can be pretty good at mathematics, right? So if you need help coming up with some type of risk scoring model, I have seen some cases where AI can help you do that. It can help score responses against your risk criteria. So if you give it your risk criteria and then give it a vendor's uploaded, questionnaire or something like that, it can actually help you score the points that it does meet that and the points that it falls short. And it can also help extract security controls and map them to certain frameworks. So looking at that type of things. And then additionally, one thing I always like to point out in terms of, having AI run through those questionnaires, it's also very good at highlighting like suspiciously vague answers, right? So have it run through it and say, hey, AI, chatbot, whatever, right? Run through all these answers and point out or highlight any ones that you feel are a bit vague or a bit suspicious to me, right? And it can kind of come up with that. Another thing that you can have AI do, I don't think I have a bullet point for this one, but you can also have AI draft tailored follow-ups automatically, right? So have AI write your emails and your follow-ups to certain vendors that aren't responding to you or aren't filling out your questionnaires in time. Have it do those types of things, set it to do it on some type of schedule, and maybe even send them out for you. But don't be writing all those follow-up emails yourself, or don't have your analyst do it. AI can do that for you. Another huge thing that I wanted to talk about that AI is very good at is contract review and clause analysis, right? So AI can rip through different vendor contracts and surface things like missing security clauses, weak indemnification language, right? Data handling issues, crazy SLA, requirements, breach notification timelines that it feels are unrealistic, anything like that. Always have throw those contracts into some type of AI and have it point out those things for you. And I want to give a really quick example of how we're actually doing that internally. So Novacoast built an AI web interface for our own internal legal contract analysis. So we built a contract analyzer and we have all of those AI models running on-prem. That way we're never sending any of these contracts or anything like that to any cloud environments or any of the hyperscalers. We built on-prem LLM models, which if you need help or have questions about how to do that, it's actually quite cheap and a lot easier than you might think. So let us know. But we built all of that on-prem so we can keep all the data in-house, and we throw those contracts into an AI bot that analyzes them for our legal team. And so that's another really important thing that AI can really assist with in terms of third party. Now, what is AI not good at, right? Where is it not yet? It's really bad at adding context for business nuance, right? We all know our businesses better than any AI bot is ever going to. So it's really something to keep in mind. AI responses are going to be a lot more generalized. If you need a response that's very specific to your business context or nuance, that's something that it's just not there yet. Humans, of course, are still needed for judgment calls and escalation, right? I mean, AI can only get you so far, but you do still want humans for those final judgment calls and to help figure out what should be escalated and what shouldn't. And then, of course, one thing I always like to say in general, but especially with AI, is trust but verify. Hallucinations still happen. It still makes its best guess. It's not a human. So use AI to get that first step. Trust it, but always verify its responses. You're never going to have AI, at least right now in the exact current state of AI, completely taking over this process for you. And then a last trend that I wanted to talk about that I've seen, a lot of conversations around our customers with is this idea of outsourcing TPRM or keeping it in-house, right? What I've initially seen, a lot of people were doing it in-house for a long time. And then kind of what I saw a few years ago is people were outsourcing it, but more so overseas, right? Maybe outsourcing it to lower cost of work countries or to India or something like that. Now I'm seeing this trend where people kind of are wanting to bring it back onshore, and part of that is in-house, part of that is outsourcing, to onshore companies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of that and what it looks like. In terms of outsourcing managed and doing managed TPRM, the pros, scale and speed, of course, right? You're going to have a team that's dedicated to doing this, that does this all day, every day. It's an ability to scale your team much faster than you can and probably get vendor assessments done a lot quicker than you can. And there's no need to build out that internal maturity. This is something that I feel I saw in the movement of outsourcing SOC quite a few years ago, right? If I look at a managed SOC or running like a managed SIM, the reasons that I see people outsourcing this the most often is it's really hard to keep entry level like SOC ones on staff, right? There's a lot of turnover in that area. Things are having to run 24/7. So now you're dealing with a lot of shifts and a lot of people. But also, it's not the most interesting work in the world, right? You're monitoring a screen, looking for alerts and things like that, and then doing escalations. I would say it is relatively similar now in a space where some of the TPRM work is. So obviously we want to automate as much as we can, and we do want to use AI for a lot of things, but there's always going to be that element of doing TPRM, especially when you have to for compliance, that's chasing vendors who don't respond to you, following up via email, parsing through questionnaires. It's not the most fun or exciting work in the world. So I would say a pro of outsourcing is getting your people doing more fun or important things, right? And kind of outsourcing some more of that at least trivial side of TPRM that you can always use AI to help make more efficient and automate, but you still do need a human to help with, right? Cons of outsourcing, you're always going to have a bit of that loss of business context, especially when you're outsourcing to the larger players, right, who have more of a playbook or a model for this, not doing anything quite as custom, as maybe you would do in-house. Obviously, quality can vary, so you're always going to want to triple check your providers and see them. And then one of my favorite points, it does give you another vendor that you have to manage. So that's kind of some of the pros and cons on outsourcing, especially that I've seen or heard from my clients. And then in terms of running it in-house, pros and cons, right? Kind of just the opposite of what we went over, but full business context and direct quality control. Obviously, anything you're ever running in-house, you're going to be able to have full control over. And depending on how the potential outsourcer has their model, sometimes doing it in-house can allow for better integrations with your other tools and security workflows, right? If you're going with an outsourcing model that's very black box and they kind of, you get what you get, they might not integrate with all your other tools and might not give you all the underlying data. I would say this is only a con though, depending on the provider that you go with. So if it's something that you're looking to outsource, make sure you're going with someone who can write custom integrations or things like that and do give you access to 100% of the underlying data and aren't just giving you some type of sanitized report. The cons, like I said, it's repetitive and trivial work at times. AI is helping with that, but there's still going to be that element. So something to consider, it might not be the most fun thing in the world. There's always going to be the staffing pain. It's definitely a slower ramp up. I spoke to a client very recently and they have still 45 vendor assessments left to complete before the end of the year, which was a pretty big chunk for them because they just weren't able to keep up, with the volume. And so that said, it's easier to get behind on vendors and assessment cadence. But to wrap it up, I kind of want to review a few of the key points. Third-party attacks are on the rise. Okay, I don't think we need to dig into that one. Everyone knows it. It's in the news every day. Implement vendor tiering and do it in the way, the best of your ability you can that I described. Having clear and precise definitions, understanding, what makes a vendor critical versus high, and making sure that that's clear across the board, and knowing that not all vendors are built equal. Like I said, if you want a list of all those kind of questions I rattled off that could be good to figure out what tier of vendor should be, just shoot me an email or something like that. Kind of find a way to get in contact with me and I can send that over. Utilize AI for questionnaire parsing and summarize insights. This is really important. It can really, really help speed things up. And whether that's you building some type of AI tool in-house or purchasing a TPRM tool that's utilizing AI in a high capacity, either one of these is something that you should be doing for TPRM. Again, if you have questions on who those vendors are in the market that I personally feel are utilizing AI the most, shoot me an email or something and let me know, and I'm happy to get that information over. One thing I didn't really talk about, but I did want to make sure I added in here before we end, is use TPRM to your advantage to create leverage with these potential vendors that you're thinking of onboarding. When you know a vendor's weaknesses, you can negotiate better pricing, better controls, better SLAs, remediation timelines, right? One thing that I have learned as a consultant who we do not sell any product, or we don't have a product of our own, right? But I work with a lot of product companies who want to resell their product. I work with all their sales reps, and a huge thing that I've learned is a sales rep will do anything to close a deal. So if security is the reason that their deal is on the line or that they might not hit their revenue, they will do anything, including cutting pricing, going to their CRO, getting special, kind of things to help get that deal closed, right? So use that to your advantage. If there's something a vendor is unwilling to change that you've asked for, talk to your sales rep and tell them that you need a lower price or something like that. Really use it to create leverage. Trust me, it can work. And then consider outsourcing to focus on more complex tasks, right? I would say in general, though, the majority of the feedback that I have heard from my clients, if this is something you're going to outsource, if you are going to use a lower cost offshore provider, really try to stay on top of quality. I've had quite a few clients in the last probably about year and a half who have pulled it back from an offshore provider and kind of found someone onshore to do this because they do want to move away from it being more checkbox and compliance based to something actually useful for them in their environment. So that's all I have for you. I know we're kind of right at time. I threw my email and my LinkedIn, the QR code just for my LinkedIn here. So if you guys have any questions about things I put up or wanted, if you want the slides or you want any of the questions that I went over or you want to know some of those products that I was kind of mentioning, just shoot me an email or ping me on LinkedIn or something like that, and I'm happy to help provide it. I don't know if we had the ability to take any questions in this, Michael, do we? If so, I'll answer a few questions.
There was one question that we got. The question is, we are asked to greatly shorten the questions and the complexity / duration of the reviews. What are you seeing done to accomplish this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll answer it twofold. The first is not doing that, not reducing the questions or the complexity, but allowing the vendor use of a tool that will allow AI to answer those questions for them, right? Kind of like I mentioned. So when you have a tool that uses AI to parse through their SOC 2s, their pen tests, maybe their trust centers, and answer those questionnaires on the vendor's behalf, the vendor no longer cares how long or complex those questionnaires are, right? Because AI is doing the bulk of the work for them. They can just come into your portal, upload the SOC 2, the pen testing reports, link their trust center or whatever, and the AI can go through and do all that. So that's the first answer. The second would be kind of back to my point about creating leverage. If that vendor wants you to purchase, their tool or something, then I don't think that they should be the ones necessarily making the commands or the demands, right? If you do have questions that you feel are important to be answered, use that leverage and, just tell them, answer these questions or you're not getting my business. I've found that to be relatively successful. And then the third would be definitely shorten those questionnaires based on tiering, right? So only ask the questions that you genuinely feel are adding value based on the data sensitivity, the access, and the business criticality that vendor has to your environment.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
with time being run out now, we thank you guys for attending. If you want to ask any more questions, you can reach out to Sarah personally. We will be sending out the slides and recording shortly after this briefing, and we can help set up any one-on-ones with Sarah if you guys would like. Appreciate you guys' time and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.